the gift that divides. When love means letting go. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of profound stillness that comes when words cut so deep they slice through assumptions about love, family, and what it means to protect the people closest to your heart. Steve Harvey stood at his podium, his confident smile frozen as he processed what he'd just heard, recognizing that this answer would transform a simple game show question into something approaching a moral referendum. 38-year-old Benjamin Clark stood at the contestant podium in his simple blue button-down and khakis, looking like any suburban father who might coach Little League on weekends. His sandy hair was slightly disheveled, his green eyes carrying the weight of someone who had made a decision that divided his world into those who understood and those who thought he'd lost his mind. "We asked 100 people," Steve had announced with his trademark energy. "Name something your family thinks you're crazy for wanting to do." He'd expected the typical responses that would generate knowing laughs and relatable eye rolls. Skydiving, maybe. Quitting a stable job to pursue art. Moving across the country. The kinds of family disagreements that were ultimately harmless. The sort that would light up the board and keep the audience engaged with familiar domestic dynamics. Instead, Benjamin looked directly into Steve's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had thought deeply about an impossible choice, and delivered 16 words that would expose one of the most complex moral dilemmas a family could face. "Give my kidney to a stranger instead of saving it for my own kids." The studio fell into a silence so complete it seemed to absorb all sound. Not the comfortable pause of a game show, but the devastating quiet that follows a truth so morally complex, it forces everyone to examine their own definitions of love, sacrifice, and responsibility. Steve's perpetual motion stilled as he recognized that this wasn't just a family disagreement. This was a fundamental conflict about the nature of love itself, about whether protecting your family meant hoarding resources for them, or demonstrating that love extends beyond blood ties. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled to understand what was happening. This wasn't part of any show format they'd prepared for. Contestants were supposed to share light-hearted family quirks, not expose profound moral divisions that challenged everyone's understanding of parental duty. Benjamin Clark had been researching living kidney donation for 8 months, ever since he'd read about 12-year-old Maya Santos, a girl he'd never met who was dying of kidney failure while waiting on the national transplant list. Something about her story, maybe her age, maybe her smile in the newspaper photo, maybe the randomness of genetic lottery that had condemned her while blessing his own children with perfect health, had planted a seed that grew into an unshakable conviction. He was a perfect match. Not just compatible, perfect. His kidney could save her life, give her decades she wouldn't have otherwise, allow her to grow up, graduate, fall in love, maybe have children of her own. The surgery was relatively simple, the recovery straightforward, the risk minimal. But his family saw it as betrayal of the most fundamental kind. "Mr. Clark," Steve said softly, setting down his cards and moving away from his podium. Something in Benjamin's expression had triggered every instinct Steve had developed over decades of reading people who carried impossible burdens. "Tell me about this." The question opened floodgates that Benjamin had been trying to keep sealed through months of family arguments, sleepless nights, and the growing realization that doing what felt right to him meant disappointing everyone he loved most. "I have 2 healthy kids," Benjamin began, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes. "Emma's 10, Jake's 8. Perfect kidneys, perfect health, perfect lives ahead of them. But there's this girl, Maya, she's 12, and she's dying because she can't get a kidney. I'm a match, and I want to give her one of mine." The Clark family stood at their team podium, his wife Sarah, his brother Michael, his sister-in-law Jessica, and his mother Helen, all of them shifting uncomfortably as their private war was exposed under studio lights. This game show appearance was supposed to be fun, a family bonding experience, not a public trial of Benjamin's sanity. "My wife Sarah," Benjamin continued, looking at the woman who had shared his bed for 15 years, but couldn't share his conviction about this decision. She thinks I'm being reckless with our children's future. She says, what if Emma or Jake needs a kidney someday? What if something happens and I've already given away the spare? The rival family, the Morrison clan from Tennessee, stood frozen at their podium. They were a traditional family who had always believed that charity begins at home, that parents' first and only obligation was to their own children. They'd come for fun and prizes, not to witness a family tearing itself apart over a stranger's suffering. How long have you been thinking about this? Steve asked gently. 8 months, Benjamin answered immediately. Ever since I saw Maya's story in the paper. Her remnants have been on the waiting list for 3 years. 3 years of dialysis, of hospitals, of watching their daughter get weaker while they pray for someone else's tragedy to give them hope. He paused, looking out at the studio audience, 300 people who represented the full spectrum of opinions about duty, sacrifice, and the boundaries of love. I kept thinking, Benjamin continued, what if that was Emma? What if that was Jake? What if my child was dying and the only thing that could save them was someone else's willingness to help a stranger? Wouldn't I want that person to exist in the world? The studio was completely silent now. Even the usual rustling of programs and shifting in seats had stopped. Camera operators who had filmed hundreds of tapings found themselves emotionally invested in a moral dilemma that had no clear answer. And your family's response? Steve asked, though he suspected he already knew. My mother, Benjamin said, glancing at Helen with a mixture of love and frustration. She says I've lost my mind. She says a parent's job is to protect their own children first. That giving away a kidney to a stranger is like playing Russian roulette with my kids' futures. Helen Clark stood at the family podium with tears in her eyes, her maternal instincts warring with her recognition that her son was trying to do something beautiful. She'd raised him to be kind, compassionate, generous, but she'd never imagined those values would lead him to what felt like reckless endangerment of his own family. My brother Michael, Benjamin continued, he's a doctor. He keeps sending me statistics about kidney failure rates, about the risks of living with one kidney, about all the things that could go wrong. He says I'm gambling with my children's security for a stranger who might not even appreciate the sacrifice. Steve found himself moving closer to Benjamin, drawn by recognition of a particular kind of courage, the courage to extend love beyond the boundaries that society insisted were natural and necessary. What does your heart tell you? Steve asked. My heart tells me, Benjamin said, and now his voice was thick with emotion, that love isn't about hoarding resources for your own family. Love is about creating a world where all families can hope for help when they need it most. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small photo, worn from handling. It showed a young girl in a hospital bed, smiling despite the dialysis tubes and monitors surrounding her. This is Maya, Benjamin said, showing the photo to Steve. She sent me this after we found out we were a match. She doesn't know I'm fighting with my family about whether to help her. She just knows that maybe, possibly, someone might save her life. Steve studied the photo, seeing not just a sick child but a representation of every stranger who might need help, every person whose life could be saved by someone willing to love beyond the boundaries of biology. Benjamin, Steve said, his voice carrying new gravity. What do you say to people who think you should save your kidney for your own children? I say, Benjamin answered, that I'm not taking anything away from my children. I'm teaching them something about the kind of world I want them to live in. A world where strangers help strangers, where love isn't limited by DNA, where doing the right thing matters more than playing it safe. The Morrison family, their competitors in this forgotten game, had abandoned any pretense of competition. Bob Morrison, father of 3 who had always believed that family came first, found himself questioning assumptions he'd never examined. But what if something happens? Steve asked, playing devil's advocate. What if one of your children needs a kidney and you don't have one to give? Then I hoped, Benjamin said, his voice gaining strength, that we live in a world where someone else will step up for them. the way I'm stepping up for Maya. I hope that by choosing to help a stranger, I'm contributing to a culture where strangers help each other. Steve felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't about reckless parenting or misplaced priorities. This was about someone who understood that the best gift you can give your children isn't the guarantee of spare organs. It's the example of unconditional love. What do your kids think? Steve asked. Emma and Jake, Benjamin said, his face lighting up for the first time. They get it in a way the adults don't. When I showed them Maya's photo, Emma said, Daddy, if that was me, wouldn't you want someone to help? Jake said, You have 2 kidneys and she has none. That's not fair. The audience began to react, not with applause but with the quiet sounds of recognition. Some were crying softly, others sat in thoughtful silence, processing a perspective that challenged comfortable assumptions about the limits of love. Out of the mouths of babes, Steve said softly. Exactly, Benjamin confirmed. My children understand something the adults have forgotten, that fairness matters, that sharing matters, that sometimes helping someone else is the most important thing you can do. Steve began removing his suit jacket, his movements deliberate and symbolic. The jacket was navy blue, expensive, representing success earned through talent and hard work. Benjamin, Steve said, draping the jacket around Benjamin's shoulders. This jacket represents something valuable that I've worked to achieve. But you know what it doesn't represent? Benjamin looked up at him, curious about where this was leading. It doesn't represent the most valuable thing I have, Steve continued. The most valuable thing I have is the capacity to love, to help, to make someone else's life better. And that's not something you can save up or hoard. That's something that grows when you use it. The jacket fit Benjamin perfectly, but somehow it looked different on him than it had on Steve, less like armor and more like a uniform for service. Your family is afraid, Steve said, turning to address not just Benjamin but Sarah, Helen, Michael, and Jessica, because they love you. They want to protect you and your children. But what they're missing is that protection isn't just about keeping resources for yourself. Protection is about creating a world where resources exist for everyone who needs them. Steve turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned hard truths about love and sacrifice. To everyone watching this, he said, looking directly into the camera, ask yourself, what kind of world do you want to live in? One where people only help their own families, or one where families help other families? He turned back to Benjamin's family, his expression challenging but compassionate. Sarah, he said, speaking directly to Benjamin's wife, I understand your fear, but consider this. Your husband isn't taking anything away from your children. He's showing them what courage looks like, what love looks like when it extends beyond biology. The camera caught Sarah's face as Steve's words hit home. For the first time, she seemed to see her husband's decision not as betrayal but as an extension of the values they'd tried to instill in their children. And Helen, Steve said, turning to Benjamin's mother, you raised a son who wants to save a stranger's life. That's not failure as a parent. That's success beyond your wildest dreams. The game show had been completely forgotten. This wasn't about points or prizes anymore. This was about expanding definitions of family, about understanding that love multiplies when it's shared, about choosing courage over fear. There's something I want to share, Benjamin said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a letter. This came from Maya's grandmother last week. She doesn't know if I'll go through with the donation, but she wanted to thank me for considering it. He unfolded the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he began to read. Dear Mr. Clark, he read, I don't know if you'll decide to help our Maya, but I want you to know that just knowing someone cares enough to consider it has given our family hope we haven't felt in 3 years. Maya talks about you every day, not as someone who might save her life, but as proof that angels exist. The studio was completely silent as Benjamin continued reading. Whether or not you can help Maya, You've already helped our family believe that goodness exists in strangers, that people care about children they've never met, that love is bigger than we sometimes dare to hope. Thank you for considering what most people wouldn't even think about." Steve felt his own eyes filling with tears as he processed the profound impact Benjamin's consideration had already had, regardless of his final decision. "Benjamin," Steve said, "have you made your decision?" "I have," Benjamin answered, looking directly at his family for the first time since taking the podium. "I'm going to give Maya my kidney, not because I love my children less, but because I love them enough to show them that love isn't limited, that courage matters more than comfort, that doing the right thing is more important than playing it safe." The studio erupted, not in typical game show applause, but in the complex sound of people processing something that challenged their understanding of love, duty, and the boundaries of family. Sarah Clark left the family podium and crossed the stage to her husband, tears streaming down her face. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, finally understanding that his choice was an extension of the love that had brought them together. 6 months later, Steve Harvey received a photo in the mail. It showed Benjamin Clark and Maya Santos side by side in hospital beds, both smiling despite the surgical recovery, both alive because someone had chosen love over fear. The note attached read, "Mr. Harvey, the surgery was successful. Maya is thriving with her new kidney, and I'm healing well with mine. But the real miracle isn't medical. It's that my family finally understands that I didn't give anything away. I created something beautiful, proof that strangers can love each other, that families can extend beyond biology, that the best gift you can give your children is an example of what unconditional love looks like." Today, Benjamin Clark speaks at organ donation events across the country, sharing not just his story, but Maya's continued health and happiness. His children, Emma and Jake, have started a non-profit organization that connects potential living donors with recipients, understanding that their father's gift wasn't just to Maya but to everyone who benefits from a world where love knows no boundaries. Maya Santos, now healthy and thriving, has become like family to the Clarkes, not replacing anyone, but expanding their definition of what family can be. She calls Benjamin Uncle Ben, and his children her kidney cousins. And every year on the anniversary of the transplant, both families celebrate not just Maya's health, but the courage it took to choose love over fear. The kidney that Benjamin gave away, he learned, wasn't a subtraction from his family's resources. It was a multiplication of their capacity for love, proof that the most precious things we have aren't diminished when shared, but enriched when given freely. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children isn't protection from a dangerous world, but participation in making that world more loving, one stranger at a time.